We welcome Dr. Randy Poe, Executive Director of the Northern Kentucky Education Council and the former superintendent of Boone County Schools in Kentucky, to this Leaders Learning from Leaders podcast. Dr. Poe is also currently an at-large member of the Kentucky Board of Education. While superintendent in Boone County, Dr. Poe focused on academic rigor, real-world relevance, and partnerships with students, parents, and the community, leading Boone County Schools to becoming one of Kentucky's most recognized school districts, with recognition not limited to test scores, but including innovation, governance, career readiness, and continuous improvement. Dr. Poe has been recognized at both the state and national levels for his accomplishments, including Kentucky Superintendent of the Year and numerous awards recognizing his advocacy for public education. Welcome, Randy. It's great to have you joining us.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure.
So, for starters, you've spent over 3 decades in Boone County in many different roles. So, I'm wondering if you'd tell us a little bit about Boone County Schools, and then what were the changes that you saw prior to moving into the superintendency?
Yeah, good morning. As you said, Steve, it was a pleasure serving in Boone County. Boone County, over 39 years that I was there, I saw many changes from starting as a small rural school district, moving to a suburban, rural, and an urban school system of 21,000 students. So we saw a lot of growth and scale during that time. During the 90s and around 2008, we were the largest growing school district in the country behind Clark County, Nevada, and Utah. So we saw a lot of growth, saw a lot of students. I mean, we were building a school building almost every year for 10 years. We had a lot. So during that particular time, we started out like I said, as a small rural school district of 3,000 some students that combined back in the 1950s. And within that growth, we saw increasing diversity. So during that, Boone County changed over those 39 years. With development of our schools, and our schools were keeping up. So we also had a shift in expectations during that time. Going from just a small rural school district, and then it's kind of a suburban school district. And then our focus was on moving from those good schools to being college, career, and life ready for every student, because not every student that we were teaching were going back and working on farms during that particular time. So the school system itself changed during those 30 some plus years. So in the state of Kentucky and across the nation, we saw the accountability era change from NCLB coming in to other things in the state that it was called. So that brought some changes on how success was defined, and also how we communicated to our parents, because NCLB had defined mechanisms that changed the way we communicated to our parents. Also, we changed an operational understanding of our school district. As we said, we were a rural district, focused on our farming and different things, and industry grew. The international airport grew in our area. That spurred a lot of growth. We became a transportation hub. So we had to start a 360 view of our system during that time. And during that time, back in the early 1900s, my predecessor, who brought me into the district office, we were working on how can we embrace data, innovation, and reflective practice as our norms. And that's what we really worked on during that time in my superintendency.
So when as you entered the superintendency, what were you seeing as a couple of the biggest needs as you moved into that role?
Well, I think some of the biggest things that we need to continue to work on was having a united strategic direction we had to have a clear, actionable, strategic plan that was really aligned with our vision, our resources, and our daily practices. So what we did is we worked and we looked at different platforms out there. And one of the platforms that we adopted in our district during my superintendency was the PELP framework, the Public Education Leadership Framework out of Harvard. We weren't part of the first 10 school districts that piloted it, but we were part of the 10 school districts after that, or states that piloted a state type of system with them. So we were focused on the instructional core. So we would realign everything that we had in our district around the instructional core, and the instructional core focused on the curriculum, the teachers, and the students. Rigor, relevance, and relationships. How did we build that? Then we had 3 strategic large goals to accomplish with 3 minor goals that we developed as a system. So we were going to keep it strategic alignment, but not a lot of initiatives, and focused on that instructional core, which is the students, the relationship between the teacher, the curriculum, the teacher, and the student and the curriculum, and the student and the teacher. And by doing that focus, instead of saying it's about kids, it's really about how kids are learning and how are we improving the learning process. So we defined that. Then we went and we looked at kind of the equity gaps that was growing across our district, because remember, I said we went from 3,000 students to 21,000 students. So we were developing, schools that used to be low poverty became some high poverty, some not having any poverty type of situation in the suburban core of that. So we focused on career and college readiness for all students. We said that we wanted to build pathways, credentials, and partnerships that matched our regional workforce. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, but that built communication and trust with our stakeholders. And I think that's what was important, was strengthening the relationships with board members, our staff, our families, and our community partners. With the focus being on student well-being. I think that's what, we miss today. We've had some buzzwords out there, different things, but student well-being is recognizing that our students have some mental health resiliency and belonging. They need a foundation for academic success. So as I learned from one of our university professors back in, not professors, but at the CEO of University of Cincinnati, he came out and he was talking to our seniors. And he said that the number one thing that defined student success on the post-secondary level was grit, well-being, resiliency. Those are the things that determine whether a child or a student was successful at the post-secondary, and what else would make them successful at the K-12 level but that. So we had a focus on that early, and often during the 30 years that we would build that, we would have a goal for our school around that, and a teacher for the classroom, and an individual goal for the students. So we measured hope well-being. And when that increased, it had a direct correlation, and the University of Cincinnati did this for us to prove the point. That had a 10%, every time at a 4-quadrant increase, you gain 10% of academic performance. So 40% of academic performance was being evaluated based on whether we were improving health, well-being, and grit. So by improving that, that also improved our test scores. So we didn't focus on test scores, we focused on the student.
Okay, so you're triggering 2 areas here that are big for me. There's a phrase that I use called student learning production behaviors. So my statement is that teachers don't cause student achievement, students cause student achievement. So it's really a focus on what the students do, and everything you're describing is the teacher creating the environment for the students to take on those learning behaviors. So I'm wondering, when you looked at academic rigor and you look at real world relevance, how did that translate into what students experienced in school?
Yeah, and that's a very good question because, see, that's the number one thing that drives success of schools and school districts. And so what we did is early on in this process, when we looked at that, we were, as I said before, we were looking at this holistic view of how do we improve education within our district. And one of our early partnerships was Ken K from the 21st Century Skills, the 4Cs movement. And we developed a partnership with Ken before his organization even took out, when he was first working with a group within the national educational movement at that particular time. But we were one of the first of 3 school districts working with Ken K to develop a portrait of a graduate, a portrait of a learner. And so what we did is we defined what those essential skills were. And of course, Ken K defined them as the 4 C's. Well, we went on in Boone County and we developed the 10 C's. Ken would laugh at us and said, the 4's not enough. Huh? And I said, yeah, well, after that, we kind of narrowed those down to about 6 or 7 but if you did, go out there and query Boone County Schools, you would see those 10 C's that we had. And they were all very specific, but we did do some brainstorming to decrease them a little. But we went past the 4 C's because we knew building that student-teacher relationship as you go back. The student is there, but the teacher, remember, on the instructional core, that 67% of the equation of student success is the student and the teacher, and the relevancy that the teacher brings to the work, which engages the student in the process of learning. And as Phil Shalecki always said, it's about engagement. If we can engage the students, we're going to have a successful student. So what we did is we defined that portrait. And what was interesting is I just attended an AI workshop the other day in relationship to this professor, and they were talking about AI not replacing things. But what AI is doing, you no longer call these soft skills, you call them competitive skills, because that rigor, relevance, relationships, developing critical thinking, collaboration, and communication is a must in the AI era that we're going into. So what we did is we then said, with the portrait of a graduate, because that teacher comes out of you of a Venn diagram of those things. Okay, how do we develop and how do we look at career pathways? So we partner with our post-secondary schools to tear down the K-12 and say, we're a P16. We're early learning, we're K-12 learning, and how are our children going to be successful in the post-secondary world? So we started dual credit early on, and I validate that, saying that we have the largest dual credit in the Northern Kentucky area in the state of Kentucky. And that means that we're one of the number 1 regions in the country, because Kentucky is number 1 right now in offering dual credit to high school seniors. So we kind of started that in Northern Kentucky. So really proud of that. And that goes back to everything that we said. If kids can play up in basketball, if they can play up in tennis, why can't they play up in academic performance? Why is a chronological age keeping the student back? So what we started doing was accelerating kids based on their academic performance. And that was a driving success. But the driving success of that was not test scores. The driving success was the portrait of a graduate. If a student developed those communication skills and deep critical thinking skills, and then their encouragement. The one thing that I didn't mention, which is very powerful, is student voice in this. So the difference between student voice and teacher voice is you have to train your teachers to listen to your students in this pathway. And we did this. We trained over 2,000 of our teachers with the Buck Institute in diving deep on project-based learning. But we took it one step further. We said, teachers, don't define the projects for kids. Have kids define their projects, and you guide them as the expert in creating that. No idea that they're going to develop is a bad idea. It's how far they can take it, and then teach those entrepreneurial skills on whether or not you can bring that to relevancy into life. So that kind of made a difference. So it was really looking at that integrated leadership, the grit, perseverance of students, and their independence in the classroom. We had developed a student board on our Board of Education in those 30 years, first in Kentucky. We saw that at a national conference at NSBA about a student board member. And the difference also between ours, we didn't elect them. The students across the district did. We had a student advisory. They would hold elections, and just like the adult representative, and they got to vote on every issue. Their vote by law could not change the direction of the board, but they would vote. So instead of having a 5-0 vote, we'd have a 6-0 vote, or a 4-2, or instead of a 3-2, that type of thing. And the board members, every board meeting, would ask them what their opinion was on that particular topic representing the students. So they got the board agenda, just like a teacher. The student board rep set up a meeting with me just as the board members did. So we always had the student voice in mind when we were making decisions.
So how do you do all that innovation without getting implementation fatigue?
Yeah, another great question. I think it goes back to what we said earlier. You have to have a core. As a district, you have to have a core. What are you about as your core? Your core doesn't change over time. The work changes over time is what occurs. So what we did is we followed, and I always like to give credit to where credit is due. We had Joel Murphy out of Vanderbilt University come and speak to us. And it was really on this topic back in the 1990s, mid-90s, 2000 on this, that I was saying the same thing. How do I not make sure that I get that innovative fatigue? And he taught me how to do it. It wasn't me deciding this. This was learning from Joel Murphy. It was a light bulb moment. He had all my administrators. He had 100 and some odd administrators in the room. And he said, guys, how do you get out of, this is one more thing that the superintendent's piling on you and so forth. He says, how many of you ever went out for breakfast, and one of the best thing that you order is a platter of pancakes? The platter of pancakes come out, and you got 5 big pancakes on there. They're thick and they're nice and fluffy and everything. And you say to yourself, oh my goodness, how am I going to eat all these 5 pancakes? Okay. So you have to think of it a pattern. So he says, but here's how you got to look at it in education reform. Think about that platter. Don't think of it stacking in an oblong way. Think of it as stacking them up. Now, the thing is that we digested partial 1 pancake, 2 pancakes, and 3 pancakes in the past. 4 and 5 pancakes are on here now that we're starting to eat. We digested the other 4. So as a leader, what you have to do is your initiatives have to be tied to your core, and you're building on that, and you have to remind people, this year we're focused on X, Y, and Z. We already accomplished the other things. We're building upon our core. So remember, I said the core doesn't change, the work changes. Well, so what we do is we adapt the work to our core. And our core was the instructional core, remember? So everything we did was focused on those things. So when we talk about student learning tied into the instructional core. Remember, we talked about student, teacher. So in teacher evaluations, in so forth, we taught this teacher to have the student work with their evaluation. And the students took it as a task, not as a joke, how I don't like this person or whatever, but how does Randy Poe, who's teaching English or I'm teaching math, how do I make this unit better? How do I make it more relevant to your learning, not changing the learning, but how do I make it more relevant so that teacher grows over time? Teacher's evaluation has to be tied into the school leadership evaluation. The school leadership evaluation is tied into the district. So as a core, they have to be aligned. So if your instruction and your evaluation is not aligned, it's Bobby Knight always said in his leadership book, and I had I had a chance to meet Bobby Knight. He is a different person if you ever met him in person than his book and how he looked on court. I was out in the hallway. I didn't know who he was. He was sitting. I happened to be in Kansas. They had the thing sitting there, and Bobby Knight was sitting there. He was sitting on like a credenza out in a hallway. Nobody's around him, and I'm sitting there, and I said, "You're Bobby Knight." He says, "Yeah, that's me." And he was polite, and I said, "You know what? My high school at this time, he's my assistant superintendent. I said, he's such a fan. I said, I got to get an autograph for him." And he says, "Okay, as long as it's not for you." And I showed him my thing. It's not for me. It's not for Randy. It's for Mike. So I'm bringing this back for Mike. And I said, "But I want you to I said, "I read all your books on leadership." I said, "I want you to sum up your thing on leadership." And he said, Randy, he said, hard work is hard work without results. It's just hard work. So if you're going to be a leader in a school district or wherever he happened to be, because he was going in to speak on some leadership, he said that leadership is defined by making sure that students are growing every day. That each day that you go into work, each day when you coach, you want that player to be a little bit better at their skill tomorrow than they were in today. If you design a lot of practices or a lot of lessons and there was no student growth outcome, it's just hard work. Hard work without results is just hard work. So be aligned. So you have to have a strategic foundation. You have to be aligned, and you have to have a core. In our core, with that instructional core, what we define those 4 C's around those 4 C's. So when you say innovative fatigue, we didn't have innovative fatigue because we were focused on these things, and the teachers saw that they were getting better each day. Now, with that, you have to do what you preach. So you have to be as a superintendent, you have to be a scientific thinker. Okay. You also have to be somewhat of a preacher, and you also got to be somewhat of a politician. Whether we like it or not, those are the 3 skills that's rolled up to be a superintendent. So when you're bringing on new initiatives, you just don't go out and lay on something new. You reflect on the past. Where was I? On a historical perspective, where we are now, and where we're going to the future. We don't have to have this done tomorrow, but what we have to do for tomorrow is make sure the student is better tomorrow as we're growing for the future. Now, how do you do that? You do have to tie that into the core. That's where the student, so as you got a board of education who evaluates the superintendent does the principals do the teachers have the students. But the most powerful thing is the reverse of that. How does the student talk to the teacher? How does the teacher talk to the principal? How does the principal talk to the superintendent? And the superintendent listen, and then the superintendent is not creating initiative fatigue because you're doing the initiatives that the students and the staff want you to do. So your professional development then is driven by having an aligned system. Hopefully that, I made sense with that.
It's interesting because as I was listening to you, what was playing back through my head, it's almost the way that you described dual enrollment.
Yes.
So people are ready to go on. Let's let them go on. It's almost that whatever is being called a new initiative is really just an extension that we're ready to go on to because of what we've previously, we'd actually be holding you back if we didn't create this opportunity for you to move on.
And what we also did from what you just said, that's a perfect way to say it. And that would bubble up. So now at the top, I have what we called our instructional core teaching and learning team. So we made up we had a makeup of some principals. We had district office people on there. We had the union representatives, teacher representatives on there. These ideas through these evaluations would bubble up. So then what we did is we were the planning committee. We would meet just monthly because we didn't meet if we didn't have meetings or purpose to meet for. But these ideas that would bubble up, we would go out and find that. And that would be the next iteration that we're working on. And what we would do before we ever did anything, we did a book study on different things. Within that book study with the teacher, we did it with The Board of Education would meet monthly on a book study with our principals, open dialogue. I know a lot of superintendents would, oh my goodness, how could you do this? Well, you have to have trust and you have to have communication. So we had an open book study with our Board of Education they would open the board meeting, but step out of their roles to the round tables. We would have a discussion, then we come back. So now there was no lack of trust, lack of communication on our district level, but we never implemented any of those things until we percolated those things. Did we vet those things into us? And, that's where community and parent engagements, we invited them to the meetings because we did a book study, was called Beyond the Bake Sale. And we involved our community into those discussions. So the thing is when you would go on a website, or let's say Boone County's website, somebody would post something negative. One of these other parents that were there I don't know what you're talking about. I was just at a board meeting and we discussed this. They would then encourage them, instead of complaining on the website, to come to the board workshops that we had to discuss these particular topics in an open forum where it was non-threatening and so forth. And we had a person, what we called we adopted this from business as APQC. American Productivity and Learning Council, whatever, the work that we did, we had a process improvement person. So anything in those discussions that would look out and say, we could improve a process in our district, that was their job to go look at and form a committee and tackle from those meetings. So good ideas came out of them, bad ideas came out of the meetings. But you know what? We listen to the voice of the community and we listen to the voice of the students. And that's why I sit there and say I had 13 great years as a superintendent because, we had a system, and we created trust and communication in calm waters before the storms came. We had big topics. I mean, we had people coming in. We were the poster child in the nation when they wanted to arm teachers. I don't know. We had some person that was a pilot, was a community figure. We had the sheriff and everybody want to arm teachers. We had 500 people in the room. But you know what? We believed in our process. Our process held out, and we did not arm teachers. Didn't want to. We didn't, but we listened, the good and the bad. We brought in representatives from insurance companies. We brought in security people from across the country. And the security people said it was the worst thing that you could possibly do was arm a third grade teacher in a reading circle if you truly believed in reading. So what we did instead of that, we were one of the first schools in the nation. We did have an SRO in every one of our buildings. We partnered with the Sheriff's Association, the county, and you know what? It was the best PR. That was the alternative to arming teachers, was to make sure we had a learning environment, that learning came first, but security was very heavy to benefit learning. But we did build a fortress to keep people away from coming in that weren't part of the system. Now, we had to change facilities, but we listened. Okay. So not everybody was happy, but you know what? We built trust. And when that storm hit, we were able to come out of that storm with a structure in place that listened to people.
I'm hearing listening being empowering.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Well, Randy, tell us a little bit about the Northern Kentucky Education Council.
Oh, sure. So, I had the privilege of working in Boone County Schools for 39 years. And one of the organizations back when I started in the thing we created was called the Northern Kentucky Education Council. And that was started back in the movement around 2000 when the national chambers were saying that we needed to improve our schools, and businesses and everybody needed to be aligned. So we said, hey, that's great. So with the help of Northern Kentucky University, Thomas More University in our area, Gateway Community and College System, and the superintendents, we came together and we formed a P16 council. And because that work was created in Kentucky under that umbrella work going on the national level. And there were 22, 23 councils that were formed in the state of Kentucky. We're the last operational council. When I was retiring, it was just like the other one. Some of them were losing purpose and different things. I happened to be on the board, and the board asked me to continue my role and take over as the executive director when I was retiring from the education and work with the 18 school districts. We have 18 school districts in our 5-county region here. And with that, we were aligned with the P20 system. We merged in with the business, with the Northern Kentucky Chamber. They had an educational alliance. We merged that in with the P20 Council, and we became the Northern Kentucky Education Council. At that time, if you recall, there was a movie, Waiting on Superman, that was published around charter schools and the different things. So we said, we're not waiting for Superman. We are Superman. We have to create our own system here. So that's what we did. So we are made up of a 21-member board of the businesses of Northern Kentucky area, school superintendents, the post-secondary presidents. We meet on a quarterly basis, and we do alignment. That's how we do the dual credit work, as we talked about. We built what's called the Ignite Institute at the Roebling Innovation Center, which is a workforce development school that we worked with Toyota when they were leaving the area, and Governor Brashear, and we created that. And we thought we were going to have about 250 students. We opened up with 1,000 students from the region. We have 500 students that's on a waiting list each year. It's not about academic performance. It's about student engagement. All the student does is write a passion letter of why they want to be there in one of those 5 development areas, and what do they want to do with their learning, and whether they want to take it in the future. And that's the only acceptance in there. It's an A5 school. It has become one of the highest performing academic centers where kids are on maybe a 19 or 20 ACT test score type of thing. But see, test scores don't define you like the university president. It's about grit, hope, and well-being. So we work with that. So Boone County Schools and Kenton County Schools, we created an MOU. We built this school, and we get 2,000 to 3,000 people visited each particular year. So those are the type of things. So as a council, what we do, we focus on working for advocacy, as you talked about early on. And one of the things, our big job is advocacy of public education, and that our children can be successful if we talk about what the narrative is and we work on our narrative. So it's about building a foundation. Then we have programs where we have about 200 volunteers that go into schools for students reading on grade. Students that are not reading on second grade level, we send mentors into our school buildings, and they mentor the children to work with them to get them on school or on reading grade level by 3rd grade. We have more than 250 that's needed. So when people listen to the broadcast around here, we can use you as volunteers. We will have 500 if we can have 500 volunteers. So we do that. And then we work with, we call resilient and ready by design. So we work with our school systems on building hope, well-being, and grit. Our cooperative trained over 5,000 badges to teachers in Northern Kentucky on how to work on building those hope, well-being, and grit skills into lessons. You don't teach about grit. You demonstrate grit, and you work with the student to develop that grit. So that's kind of what we do. And then on the high school level, we do 2 major things. It's dual credit alignment. So we're working on pathways with the universities, always expanding those particular pathways. Because one thing we learned on a visit, we took a visit to Georgia State University. Georgia State University is a phenomenal story. Most universities only have a 37 to 40%, the 50% success rate graduating kids in post-secondary within 4 to 6 years. Georgia State University turned their thing from 30 to over 67%. So we went there and we studied that, and we came back. Well, that's because what they did, instead of saying, here's just the pathways we're going to offer. We have to look at our students. We have to look at our region, our businesses, and what pathways do we continue to work on. So we're always expanding those pathways. What we learn from Georgia State University, I could be a pre-med student, for example. I could be a pre-med student. But in these gateway courses, I'm only getting a C. That's a red flag, okay? You're probably not going to be a medical doctor to get in, because I sat on the UK admissions board for Northern Kentucky University. You're just not going to get in unless you have an ATC score, and then you got to pass the medical test and have this high score. Okay, so but you know what? There's 200 other jobs in the healthcare industry that you could go into. So now how do we work with that student and get them into a pathway where they can earn a living wage and be successful and match their career aspirations still? So what we do is we use a program here with a partnership that we started working with. It's called Hugh Science. It measures the student's aptitudes for interest. So when a student has that, we learned that from Georgia State University. How do we match that up? And how do we then have career and coaching counseling, not guidance counselors, but college and career coaching with the student? We learned this from a visit when we went to Finland also in their educational studies. The power of Finland education, the thing that brought back to me what was so great, it was parent involvement with the student. And in parent involvement with the student, each year they sit down with the teacher and they map out where they want to be, okay, and where they want to go. So that's what we didn't do, but that's what we have done in Northern Kentucky. We have mapped that out, and those career and college life coaches work with the parents on where that student career and college readiness goals need to go. And I'm proud to say in the state of Kentucky now, we, in the particular work, because the state has developed what's called the Kentucky Continuum now. The post-secondary president, Aaron Thompson, came and talked to us the one time and said, wow, and then went back and created a statewide council now, and they're up to the post-secondary institutions are now focused on the same similar things that Georgia State University was or is doing, and that's on career and guidance counseling at that post-secondary level that was never there before. I mean, when I went to school, it was sink or swim. When you went to school, it's probably sink or swim. But now they have guidance counseling and career pathway opportunities for them. And our goal is to have it's 60 by 2030, 60% of our workforce having a post-secondary degree. And right now, I think we're up to 57% in 2026. So we're some of that driving force. So that's what we do at the Ed Council. And then my job is to take all that what the superintendent's work is doing and go to the legislature and advocate for legislation for this. Also advocate for dollars and resources to get these things started, as a pilot. And then if we can, we show the success. And once you have the success, then the success starts paying for itself. So that's kind of what we do for the Ed Council.
Randy, you've had a ton of learning with your ton of experience, as I read about you before I met you today, and then got to listen to you more today, I could tell you're still on that learning journey.
Yes.
As we look to close out, what words of encouragement, purpose would you give to people who are newly moving into school administration and especially looking at the superintendency?
Yeah, how I kind of defined it back, early on today as we were discussing on this podcast is that if adults aren't learning in the building, then children aren't learning either. So as a superintendent, you have to be the lead learner. We talk about instructional leadership. We talk about, now what you have to do is you have to be the lead learner. What if you did the Gallup skills, my number one thing came back is I'm a learner. Okay. That's my number one skill. And then it's take responsibility as number two for that learning. So I think that as a leader, you must be willing to lead and demonstrate your leadership by your commitment to learning. If you're unwilling to lead book studies, if you're unwilling to lead PD workshops, if you have your teachers in a PD workshop or all your administrators, and you see this across the country, but the superintendent is too busy to stay while they're learning, what message is that sending to your people? I mean, you are on 24/7. And so you can't fake it to make it. You've got to live it. And if you're not a lead learner, the superintendency role is not for you. There are other defined roles within the thing. But see, if I don't go into work to be better tomorrow, how can I expect my teachers and students to go in to be better tomorrow? But see, whenever I counsel a student, and this goes back to the days being an assistant principal, I think an assistant principal helps you be better at being a superintendent, because I'll tell you what, especially in a middle school, when you have those students coming in, you have to really listen to them to understand where they're coming from, or otherwise you're going to have them in your office every day. Okay, so the goal is not to have Randy coming back to see me every day. So how do I get Randy engaged? And I think that's where really you, in that assistant principal role, you develop great listening skills, great communication skills, and you got to learn, because you know what? You're going to have, as an assistant principal in a middle school, there's probably about 50 to 75 of the 1,000 students you have that you're seeing almost on a daily basis, whether it's coming off the bus or the lunchroom or after school getting on the bus or over the weekend in the neighborhood. So you got to figure out, how do I teach these students to be successful? And if you can teach them how to be successful, you can teach students that have a willingness to learn. You're going to be real successful with them. So I think it goes back to being a lead learner. You got to be a lead learner, and you got to be focused on the instructional core. That is my message. And keep the core, and the work changes around the core, but be the moral and intellectual leader that you were hired to be.
I hear that. I hear that loud and clear from you, Randy. Randy, as we close out, what's the best way that people who are listening might want to follow up or check back with you?
Sure. Multiple different ways, but the Northern Kentucky Education Council is probably the easiest. It's nkyec.org, nkyec.org. And my email is on there, but it's just arpo@nkyec.org. So you just put arpo in front of that. Makes it pretty simple. And, anybody out there wants to continue any conversation that we had, just send me an email and we can set up a time and discuss it, because I love discussing how students learn and how do we advance the message. Our schools are great schools. The problem is that things are changing faster than our schools can change. Evolution's changing faster. But we are doing great things. We let other people define the narrative instead of us defining the narrative. And we got a lot of great things to tell. So my other message to superintendents is, tell your story or somebody else is going to tell it. So get it out there. And I learned that as an assistant principal. If I'm calling a parent, I'm calling the parent before the child gets home, because it's going to be a different story when the child gets home. Then we're going to have a discussion with the parent about the objective facts of the situation. So I think schooling has been the same way. Get your message out before someone else is trying to tell your message.
Thanks, Randy. Really appreciate you spending the time with us today.
I love it. Thank you. It was fantastic. What a great way to spend some time together. I appreciate it.